The opposition, back to this story, wants to toughen laws against so-called ISIS brides or any other terrorist sympathisers by going after organisations or individuals who help them. Joining us live now is the Deputy Liberal Leader, the Senator Jane Hume. Jane, good to see you this morning. Thanks for your time. So who will be targeted in your version of the legislation?
Pete, because Labor has failed to keep Australians safe by ensuring that those who have associated themselves with terrorists can too easily come back to Australia and pose a threat to Australians. This is why the Coalition is going to introduce this legislation to stop third parties assisting those who have either associated with terrorists, committed terrorist acts, or been in a declared terrorist zone from returning to this country. It does not apply to those that are there for humanitarian purposes. There will be carve-outs for that. This is simply to stop others outside of the government facilitating the returns of those that would pose a threat to Australians.
OK, so someone like Save the Children, they wouldn't be caught up in it?
If Save the Children are assisting or facilitating the return of those who would pose a threat to Australia, who meet those conditions of having been in a declared area, committed a terrorist act or been associated with a terrorist organisation, well, then they would be caught up in this. However, those that are simply facilitating humanitarian aid, they wouldn't be. There's a carve-out for that. OK, so could you give me an example on what those humanitarian agencies would be then? Well, there is an understanding that the ISIS brides that are the subject of so much controversy right now are being assisted by third-party facilitators. Now, those third-party facilitators shouldn't be allowed to do this without government sanction. Of course, the Labor government now is simply shrugging its shoulders and saying, it's not us that's doing it, this is out of our control. We want the return of anybody or the prevention of a return of anybody that would pose a threat to Australians to be within the government's control rather than within a third party's control. That's what this legislation would be. Would allow, prevent those that are facilitating the return of those that would pose a threat here. It feels like it's a bit vague in terms of differentiating between an organisation or a humanitarian group. Is that not? Have you got work to do on that front? No, quite the opposite. In fact, it's about those who are undertaking a facilitation of a return of somebody that would pose a threat, as opposed to someone who is simply administering aid. There's a big difference between those two behaviours. I think that's kind of obvious, Pete. This is about keeping Australians safe and making sure that the government takes responsibility rather than shrugging its shoulders and saying there's nothing that it can do. What about someone like Dr Jamal Rifi, who's reported to be involved in the current cohort of ISIS brides? Is that someone who could be caught up in your legislation? If this is a man that is facilitating the return of people that have either entered a declared terror area, that have associated themselves with a terrorist organisation or have committed a terrorist act, then yes, that person would be caught up within this legislation and would face the full brunt of the law, a 10-year imprisonment potentially for facilitating the return of somebody that would pose a threat to Australians. Even though they're here in Australia? If somebody is facilitating the return of those that would pose a threat, yes, they would be caught up within this legislation. This is about keeping Australians safe, Pete. This is not about targeting aid, organisations that are delivering aid to those overseas. Of course, those organisations should be able to continue in their work. Okay. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the government has its complete control over who it is that comes into Australia. If they pose a threat to Australia, well, then the door should be shut and the government should have the power to make that happen. OK, what's the threshold for help, for providing help? What's the threshold? If somebody is assisting those to cross borders, to obtain passports, to return to Australia, arrange flights, well, then those would be the people that would be caught up under this legislation. But let's be very clear. There is a condition, and the condition is the people that they are facilitating the return of must have either joined a terrorist organisation, entered a declared terrorist area in an unauthorised manner, or have committed terrorist offences themselves. I think Australians rightly would be concerned that people that have clearly pose a threat to Australians' way of life, to our values, shouldn't be allowed to be returned through some third-party operator rather than the government making the decisions about whether they should or shouldn't return.
So if someone's written emails or made some phone calls, that would be enough to get them into trouble?
Well, I'd be very concerned if there were those out there that were trying to facilitate the return of those that pose a threat to Australians. And I think Australians would be too. There should be laws that capture these people. There aren't at the moment. The Coalition is stepping up where the government has failed.
So how different is this? I'll have to close on this point, but Matt Thistlethwaite pointed this out just a short time ago. How is this different to what's already in place? The current government is just enacting your laws, is it not?
Right now, third parties can bring people back into Australia and the government can say, it wasn't our fault, somebody else did it, it's not our problem. Well, that's simply not good enough. What we want to ensure is that those that are actively facilitating the return of those who pose a threat to Australians, who meet set criteria that are clearly stated that they pose a threat to Australia by having joined a terrorist organisation, having committed terrorist offences, or have entered a declared terrorist zone. Those are the people that we are targeting, that we do not want to have actively returned to Australia. If somebody is helping them, well, then they should feel the full force of the law.
What if it's someone who's helping them who's not part of our jurisdiction, who's just overseas helping them that way? I mean, is there a grey area there?
We can only target those that are on our shores that are committing offences. We want this to be an offence in Australia. We want to make sure that there aren't people that are helping these people to return. Right. This should be the government's decisions and the government's responsibility. And the government's responsibility towards Australians is to keep them safe. If they can't do that, we will help them change the law so that they can.
OK, that's the Deputy Liberal Leader, Jane Hume. Thank you, as always, Jane.